who greeted her minister at the door as she left church after a Christmas service. With great enthusiasm, she gushed, "Oh, the service was just wonderful this morning. I got a real Christmassy feeling, just like in the department store." A Sunday school teacher asked her young class what Christmas meant to them. And almost all of the children said that the most important thing about Christmas was getting presents from Santa Claus. And of course, the most important thing about Christmas is the birth of Jesus Christ into our world. Yet, isn't it a fact that in our culture, that Jesus is being pushed out of his Christmas cradle in deference to a red-suited, white-bearded old man who bears in his sack the latest in Christmas toys and gadgets? Now, my message this morning may give you the impression that I am completely opposed to Santa Claus. That is not the case. Nothing could be further from the truth. Santa Claus is my hero, and I will never be too old to have Santa Claus in my life. We all grew up believing in the Christmas Eve magic of this jolly old elf. And certainly it is great fun on Christmas morning for parents and children alike to rummage through their stockings to see what the visitor from the North Pole has brought. It is great fun to watch the widened eyes of children as they discover that the cookies and milk set out the night before have been consumed by their mysterious guest. Now, I would not want to take such light-hearted experiences of joy and happiness away from anyone's home. Nevertheless, I am concerned that the time has now come in our culture that the Christian observance of Christmas is out of balance. Instead of complementing the Christian good news of Christmas, the notion of Santa Claus has largely become a hindrance to that good news. All too often, Christians have allowed Santa Claus to usurp Jesus in their celebrations of Christmas. Many people have not realized that the significance of the Christ child and the significance of today's Santa Claus are often very far apart and sometimes even completely contradictory. Where did the legend of Santa Claus come from? Scholars have long debated this question. The best evidence available seems to indicate that Santa Claus is actually a composite figure that is both unique to Canada and the United States and indebted to several old world customs and beliefs. History tells us that there was once a Christian bishop named Nicholas who lived in the 4th century AD coastal city of what is now southern Turkey. Once imprisoned by the Roman emperor, Nicholas developed a reputation for both his secret acts of charity and his many miracles. Actually, there is little historical information about this Nicholas, but in the centuries after his death, a strong religious tradition developed around his life. Christian churches were dedicated to his presumed sainthood as holy places of pilgrimage, and a number of legends were associated with his life. In fact, in the Middle Ages, no other non-biblical saint was as popular as Nicholas. And by the late Middle Ages, it had become the custom in several European countries to celebrate the feast day of St. Nicholas on December the 6th. Now, the night before, on December 5th, parades were often held in honor of this saint, who was portrayed as riding a white horse, carrying a shepherd's crook, and wearing robes and a mitre cap of a Christian bishop. Now, before going to sleep on this evening, children would set out straw for St. Nicholas's horse. And they would line their shoes up beneath their beds in the hope that the next morning St. Nicholas would fill them with good things to eat. I don't want to eat out of my shoe. You shouldn't lie. Children who did not obey their parents often received only birch rods and switches from the good bishop. Up to this time, very little, if any, connection was made between the St. Nicholas festival and the birth of Christ. And then when the Protestant reformers came into prominence in the 16th century, they sought as a matter of principle to ban the Roman Catholic practice of venerating saints. So they therefore rejected the popular festival of St. Nicholas. Martin Luther himself thought it was nothing less than idolatrous to give gifts in the name of St. Nicholas. Instead, he gave his children presents at Christmas time in the name of Christ. Now, several Protestant European countries adopted this practice. However, the common folk were not entirely willing to give up their old festival. And as it happened, instead of on December the 6th, the gifts of St. Nicholas began showing up in homes on Christmas morning. And thus it was virtually a fluke of religious history that first linked St. Nicholas and the birth of Jesus Christ together. Aside from the popular belief that St. Nicholas was the patron saint of children, there was really very little theological justification for this linkage. The early Puritans of New England would not even celebrate Christmas. Never mind give consideration to the legends of the ancient Christian saint. However, in New York, just prior to the Revolutionary War, several families of Dutch heritage gathered together to honor St. Nicholas in mid-December. In a sense, this Dutch celebration was largely a matter of ethnic pride and self-defense. After all, in this new world of competing old country cultures, the Scots had their St. Andrew, the Irish had their St. Patrick, and the English had their St. George. In 1810, the New York Historical Society held its first of many annual St. Nicholas's dinners. And as these dinners held on the feast of the December the 6th, printed images of St. Nicholas portrayed him wearing bishop's robes and featuring stockings hung by the fireplaces, and children who were either smiling or frowning, depending on whether they had been good or bad this year. And at about that time, these St. Nicholas dinners were being begun, Washington Irving published a humorous history of the early Dutch settlers in New York. Included in this work was the first American literary description of St. Nicholas. This supposed history told its readers that St. Nicholas was a great hero who showered Dutch children with presents on the evening of December the 5th. Irving's St. Nicholas was every inch a Dutchman. He wore a low, broad-brimmed hat and large trousers in which he carried his gifts. He smoked a long pipe. He traveled by horse and wagon on his rounds. Now, immensely popular, Irving's work initiated a widespread American interest in St. Nicholas. In a short time, St. Nicholas became more commonly referred to as Santa Claus. He was outfitted in a red suit with a flowing robe. Instead of a horse and wagon, he was given a sleigh and one reindeer. Also, it became increasingly common to associate his annual visit with Christmas Eve. Inspired by Irving and others, a New Yorker named Clement Moore penned the most famous writings about the American version of St. Nicholas, known almost everywhere where English is spoken today. And Moore's poem begins, "'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse." Originally written for his own children, Moore's poem substantially embellished the image of the new American Santa Claus. He became chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, who was full of laughter and merriment. His sleigh was now a miniature one, pulled by 8 tiny reindeer who could fly through the skies. A white beard on his chin and a bundle of toys on his back. Moore's St. Nicholas had no trouble at all flying back up the chimney when the Christmas stockings were filled. And then in 1890, illustrator Thomas Nast developed the image of Santa Claus that is so familiar today. A rotund, white-haired old man who wears a red and white suit and a stocking cap. In time, still more embellishments were added to the American Santa Claus. Eventually, he was given a home in the North Pole, a wife, and a lead reindeer with a red nose that glowed at night. As you well see, the American Santa Claus has evolved far beyond the original Christian saint, whose feast day was celebrated in the Middle Ages. By contrast, the American Santa is not so much a holy person as he is a fantastic, magical figure. Unlike the saintly bishop who went from door to door on his horse, delivering his simple gifts of food, the American Santa flies miraculously, navigates narrow chimneys, and lives in a frigid never-never land, where he and his elves mysteriously manufacture the latest in Christmas toys. It is true that Santa Claus has religious elements in his ancestry, but by and large, his function in our society seems to be far more commercial than religious. The overwhelming emphasis is not so much on Santa's generosity as it is on the presents he brings. Rather than a patron saint of Christianity, the modern Santa is really the patron saint of Christmas shopping. There's another aspect, aside from commercialization, about the modern Santa. An even more basic issue is the fact that there is a large gap between the significance of Santa Claus and the significance of the Christ child. Although the two have long been joined together in popular Christian thinking, they actually are only superficially compatible. Consider these important differences. Santa Claus represents great affluence and luxury. He is overloaded and rich with presents. As a symbol of easy prosperity, he is eagerly awaited and welcomed wherever he goes. By contrast, the Christ child of Christmas was born into a setting of great poverty and rejection. He had not a fine crib, but only a crude, stable manger in which to lay his head. Instead of being eagerly welcomed into this world, there was no room for him in the inn. Shortly after his birth, he and his parents had to flee because of the hatred, cruel hatred, of King Herod. Now, Santa Claus specializes in material gifts, whereas Jesus promises gifts of the Spirit. The followers of Santa Claus seek material abundance. The followers of Jesus seek God's kingdom, realizing that true discipleship often means the sacrifice of worldly gain and the taking up of a cross. The love Santa Claus offers is a conditional one. Boys and girls are usually expected to earn their gifts through good behavior. By contrast, the love Jesus offers is unconditional. It is offered to the good, and especially to sinners. The modern Santa Claus is a worldly figure. Like a magical Superman, he is untroubled by worldly difficulties or realities. By contrast, Jesus was born into the frailty of our flesh. He is truly Emmanuel, God with us. He shares with us not only our joys, but also our sorrows. Santa Claus is a once-a-year phenomenon of sentimental merriment. When the Christmas toys are all broken or put away, the feeling fades. By contrast, Christ is always with us. The Lord of all time and history, he brings us a deep, eternal joy that endures even beyond death. Santa Claus preoccupies us with a selfish concern for what he will bring us. The Christ of Christmas would have us turn outward from ourselves to go into the world to serve others in his name. Santa Claus is a myth that is ever changing, dependent on the cultural whims of the moment. Jesus Christ is the same Son of God yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Yes, there is a great difference between Christ and Santa Claus. Preferring this commercial, materialistic Santa Claus of myth, many Christians today are pushing the Christ child out of his own Christmas cradle. Unwittingly or not, many Christians are either ignoring the Christ child completely or are trying to make him over in the image of the secular Santa Claus. Yes, there is a great difference between Christ and Santa Claus. As Christians, in our observance of Christmas, let us strive for more Jesus and less Santa. Amen.
Amen.